The battlefield was silent, the kind of silence that came just before the storm. Michael Abayomi stood still, his heart pounding as he watched the enemy camp from a distance. The rest of his team lay in wait, hidden behind rocks and trees. The moonlight reflected off the barrel of his gun, a cold reminder of the war that was coming. He had faced many enemies before, but this was different. This time, he wasn't fighting alone. He was part of something bigger, Nigeria's last hope. And yet, he knew the weight of the mission rested squarely on his shoulders. He was the only assassin in the entire army. Michael Abayomi had always been different. From the moment he could walk, he was trained to fight. Not just fight, but kill. His father, a former military man in America, had taught him everything he knew. By the time Michael was 10, he could handle any weapon. A gun, a knife, even his bare ends. He was faster, smarter, and deadlier than anyone else. By the time he was 20, he had become one of the most feared assassins in America. But Michael wasn't satisfied. The world of killing left him empty inside. No matter how skilled he was, it never filled the void within him. After years of living in shadows, he wanted something more. That's when he decided to leave it all behind and move to Nigeria. He had heard stories about his roots and he longed for a new start, away from the bloodshed. He wanted peace. Nigeria, though, was far from peaceful. The country had welcomed him with open arms, and for a while, Michael thought he had found what he was looking for. He lived quietly, trained in secret but not using his skills. He had left his past behind. Or so he thought. When the war broke out between Nigeria and Russia, everything changed. Russia had grown powerful, threatening many nations. They had their eyes set on Africa, and Nigeria was their first target. At first, Nigeria fought back bravely, but Russia's technology and weapons were more advanced. Slowly, Nigeria began to lose. Villages were destroyed, cities burned, and hope was fading. The Nigerian government knew they needed help. They gathered the best fighters, the most skilled soldiers, and built a special team to defend their nation. Word spread of the team being put together, but no one knew Michael was part of it. They called him in, desperate for someone who could do what no one else could, someone who could turn the tide of war. Michael was hesitant at first. He had left that life behind. He wasn't a soldier, he was an assassin. But when he saw the destruction Russia was bringing to his new home, he couldn't just stand by. He joined the team, knowing he was different. He wasn't like the other soldiers. They fought with honor, following rules of war. Michael was trained to fight in the shadows, to kill swiftly and silently. He was the only assassin in the entire army. The mission was clear: strike the Russian camp and take out their leader, General Sokolov. He was the mastermind behind the invasion, and without him, the Russian forces would fall apart. The team of soldiers, led by a seasoned commander named Kamte Musa, was one of the Nigeria's finest, but they know that only Michael had the skill to get close enough to Sokolov. As they moved toward the enemy camp, the tension was thick. Michael kept his steps light, his senses sharp. His mind was focused, as it had been in his days in America. But this time, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for something bigger, something that mattered. They reached the edge of the camp. Russian soldiers were scattered, guarding the perimeter. Michael scanned the area, calculating his moves. "Stay low," he whispered to the team. He could hear his own heartbeat, steady and controlled. His instincts kicked in, and he felt that familiar rush of adrenaline. He signaled to the others to hold back while he moved ahead. The plan was for him to take out the guards quietly, then signal to the team to move in. One by one, he approached the Russian soldiers. With swift, silent movements, he took them down, barely making a sound. A slit throat here, a broken neck there. It was the work of a ghost, and by the time the others noticed, it was too late. Michael had already cleared the path. Captain Musa watched in awe. He had heard stories of Michael's skills, but seeing them in action was something else. Michael was like a shadow, moving unseen, unstoppable. When they reached the command center, where Sokolov was, Michael paused. He could feel the weight of the mission more than ever now. If they failed, Nigeria would fall. And if Nigeria fell, the entire continent could be at risk. Michael steeled himself, his hand gripping the handle of his knife. He was ready, but things didn't go as planned. Just as Michael was about to make his move, the sound of gunfire erupted. One of the soldiers had been spotted, and the entire camp was now on high alert. Chaos broke out. Russian soldiers swarmed, and the Nigerian team was forced into open battle. Bullets flew, and explosions lit up the night sky. Michael cursed under his breath. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The mission was compromised, and now the chances of getting to Sokolov were slipping away. But Michael wasn't one to give up. He adapted, as he always did. While the others engaged in the firefight, Michael slipped through the chaos, using the confusion to his advantage. He moved with precision, dodging bullets and taking out enemies in his path. Finally, he reached the command center. Sokolov was there, surrounded by guards. Michael had no time to think, only to act. He charged forward, his knife flashing in the dim light. The guards didn't stand a chance. In seconds, they were on the ground, lifeless. Sokolov turned, his eyes wide with shock. He hadn't expected anyone to get this close. "Who are you?" he sneered, backing away. Michael didn't answer. He never did. He raised his gun and fired. The shots ringing out in the night. Sokolov fell, his body hitting the ground with a heavy thud. For a moment, everything was still. Michael stood over the fallen general, his heart pounding. He has done it. The mission was over. But as he looked around at the destruction, the bodies, and the chaos, he realized that the war was far from finished. This was just the beginning. The war between Nigeria and Russia dragged on for months. Even with Sokolov gone, the Russian forces were strong. They didn't retreat as expected. Instead, they fought harder, determined to claim Nigeria. Michael continued to fight alongside the team, his skills proving invaluable. He was always on the front lines, always the one sent to do the impossible. He wasn't like the other soldiers, and they knew it. They respected him, but they also feared him. There was something different about him, something that set him apart. As the war raged on, Michael found himself questioning his place in it all. He had come to Nigeria to escape his past, to find peace. But here he was, back in the world of bloodshed and violence. Was this all he was meant for? Was it just a weapon, a tool for others to use? One night, after a particular brutal battle, Michael sat alone by the fire. The other soldiers were sleeping, but he couldn't rest. His mind was too full of thoughts. He stared into the flames, wondering if he would ever find the peace he longed for. That's when Captain Musa approached him. "You've been quiet," the captain said, sitting down beside him. Michael didn't respond. He wasn't one for small talk. "I've been watching you," Musa continued. "You are not like the others." Michael nodded. He knew that already. "You've got skills that none of us can even dream of," Musa said. "But there's something else, something inside you." Michael looked at the captain, curious. Musa was one of the few people he respected. The man had seen more battles than anyone else on the team, and he led with honor. "You fight like a man with nothing to lose," Musa said. "But I think you have something you are fighting for. Something more than just this war." Michael thought about that. He had always fought for survival, for missions, for money. But here in Nigeria, it felt different. Maybe he was fighting for something more. Maybe he was fighting for a future, for a place he could finally call home. "Whatever it is," Musa said, "don't lose sight of it. This war will end one day, and when it does, you need to know who you are." Michael nodded, his thoughts heavy. The war had taken so much from him already, but maybe, just maybe, it was giving him something in return, something he hadn't expected: purpose. The final battle came not long after. The Russians were making one last push, determined to crush the Nigerian forces once and for all. It was do or die. Michael led the charge this time. He had earned the respect of the team, and they followed him without question. The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. They had to hit the Russian hard, take out their remaining leadership, and force them to retreat. As they moved through the battlefield, Michael felt a strange sense of calm. He was ready. He had trained his whole life for moments like this. But this time, it wasn't about the kill. It was about survival. It was about something more than just the mission. It was about protecting the people, the land, and the future he had come to care about. For the first time, Michael wasn't just an assassin. He was a defender. The team moved in silence, slipping through the shadows like they had practiced. The Russian camp was heavily guarded, but Michael knew how to navigate the chaos. He had done this hundreds of times before. His instincts guided him, and his senses were sharper than ever. They reached the heart of the camp, where the enemy leaders were planning their final attack. The tension was thick in the air, and Michael could feel the weight of every second passing by. They had one shot to take them down. Michael signaled to Captain Musa, who gave the go-ahead. The team split up. each soldier taking their position around the perimeter. Michael, as always, moved silently through the center, his eyes locked on the target. He spotted the Russian commander, a burly man backing others at his soldiers. This was the man who had continued Sokolov's plans. If they took him out, the Russian forces would be thrown into disarray. Without hesitation, Michael made his move. In a swift, calculated motion, he took out the nearby guards, their bodies dropping silently to the ground. He had learned long ago that speed and precision were key. Every moment counted. As he approached the commander, the world around him seemed to fade. It was just him and his target now. The noise of the battlefield, the shouts, the gunfire, it all became background to the task at hand. Michael was in his element, but just as he was about to strike, something happened that he hadn't expected. One of the Russian soldiers spotted him and yelled a warning. The commander turned, his eyes wide with surprise as he saw Michael closing in. The element of surprise was gone. Suddenly, bullets flew through the air and Michael had to dive for cover. The mission was unraveling fast. The other members of his team were now engaged in a firefight, and the Russian forces were pouring in from all sides. Michael's mind raced. He needed to think fast. The plan had failed, but he couldn't let that stop him. He had come too far. He wasn't going to let Nigeria fall now. With a burst of energy, Michael leaped from his hiding spot, dodging bullets as he charged toward the commander. The Russian leader raised his weapon, but Michael was faster. In a split second, he knocked the gun from the commander's hands and tackled him to the ground. The two men struggled. The commander, stronger than Michael had anticipated, but strength alone wasn't enough. Michael had been trained for this his whole life. With a swift, brutal strike, he overpowered the commander. His knife pressed against the man's throat. "Call off your men," Michael growled, his voice cold and steady. The commander stared at him, defiant at first. But then he saw something in Michael's eyes, something that made him hesitate. He could see that Michael wasn't just another soldier. He was something else, something deadly. After what felt like an eternity, the commander gave a slight nod, and Michael loosened his grip, just enough for the man to shout the order. The gunfire began to die down as the Russian forces realized their leader had surrendered. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. With their leadership broken, the Russians began to retreat. Michael stood over the fallen commander, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. He had done it. The mission was a success. But more than that, Nigeria had won the war. The Russian forces were pulling back, defeated at last. Captain Musa approached, a look of relief on his face. "You did it," he said, clapping Michael on the shoulder. Michael nodded, his mind still racing. He had won the battle, but he knew that the war had a way of leaving scars that didn't heal easily. Still, for the first time in a long time, Michael felt a sense of peace. He had found his place. In the days that followed, Nigeria celebrated its victory. The war had been long and brutal, but the country had prevailed. Michael had become a hero. Though he didn't care much for the attention, he was still the same man he had always been. Quiet, focused, deadly. But now, there was something different. He wasn't just an assassin anymore. Michael stood on a hill overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the land he had come to love. Nigeria was his home now, and he knew that no matter what challenges came next, he would be ready. It wasn't just a weapon anymore. He was more than that. As the breeze swept across the hill, carrying with it the sounds of laughter and celebration from the city below, Michael smiled faintly. He had spent his life in the shadows, but now, for the first time, he felt the warmth of the light. And for the first time in years, Michael Abayomi felt truly free. Thank you for watching today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and share with your loved ones. And let me know what you learned in the comment section. I always enjoy hearing from you all. Until next time, bye.